This is not about indicting doctors and nurses. This is about working with them. The indicting part happened way back in the 1970s, and the medical model actually did change because of it. Lots of patient studies have been done since then, and the current consensus is without doubt that the patients who do the very best in surviving and thriving after surgery or treatment are the ones with the most optimistic attitudes. This is proven and mentioned consistently in the medical literature. I'd like to make the point that the point of this whole interview is not that I had a big fat miracle. That doesn't make me any better than the next person. The point is what I did to get so happy, what I did to get so optimistic. Those things primed my attitude to allow a remarkable recovery.
Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 115. If you'd like more information about the podcast, it's all at the website desertladydiaries.com, and I invite you to engage with the guests, with other listeners, or me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries, or on Twitter at Desert Lady Diary. Kathleen Lowndes' favorite game, Meeting Challenges, reached its pinnacle when she published a full-length book entitled Facing the Ultimate Fear, A New Future. It's the true story of her remarkable medical adventure, requiring an operation so dangerous that only one brain surgeon dared attempt it. That same doctor then wrote the foreword to her book. Typical for this surgery, Kathleen faced permanently losing her ability to walk, talk, and think. Now, able to do all three, her book shows how. Melt away fear, miracles appear. The desert also played a recovery role. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
What was your first experience with desert?
My very first experience with desert was when I was 8 years old, and my family was making a permanent move from upstate New York to Southern California. And after driving from New York to Chicago, we took the famous Route 66 from Chicago down through Tucumcari, New Mexico, Kingman, Arizona, Barstow and San Bernardino, California, and on to Los Angeles, where our landing spot was Inglewood, California. I first experienced the desert in New Mexico and Arizona when I was 8 years old, and I even have an old photograph from 1955, black and white of course, showing the four of us family members underneath a Joshua tree in Kingman, Arizona.
Wow. So how did you, from that and Southern California, come to be in the Joshua tree in the Mojave Desert?
Oh, that's a really interesting story. It starts in 1999. My mother had died the year before, 1998. I grieved by sitting in bed, knitting and crocheting for a solid year. When I was finished grieving, my roommate had a stroke and decided to move back home to Sweden to get lifetime health care. We gave up the apartment in the Laguna Beach area. I put all my stuff in storage, and some good friends in Banning invited me to sleep on their fold-out sofa and stay as long as I wanted to until I decided what I wanted to do with my life. My plan was to stay in Banning and take day trips back to South Orange County, get my old job back, find a place to live, and get my stuff out of storage. It never happened. Every morning when I turned on the engine of my car, it steered me up here to the high desert. I explored. I found places in Joshua Tree National Park where I had brought groups of high school students years before. Good memories flooded into my mind. After 2 to 3 weeks of this, I felt so drawn to the area that I decided to rent a house in Joshua Tree and get my stuff out of storage. And I did, and here I am. But that's when things really started to get interesting.
And what were those interesting things?
Let me condense. I remember a friend of mine had a heart attack, and I locked up the rental house in Joshua Tree and went to Oregon for 7 months. I got a job on the Central Oregon coast, booking vacation rentals at a real estate office so I could pay the rent on the locked-up house in Joshua Tree. While I was up there, I had my first brain hemorrhage. The hospital in Oregon could not diagnose it. That's not what emergency medicine is all about. But because of the bleeding brain, it was time for me, after 7 months in Oregon, to drive back to Joshua Tree. But my brain was not cooperating, and I had to wait for a good day when my brain was cooperating to make the drive. The drive was made in 3 chunks with layovers. One layover was 5 weeks. Once I reached Joshua Tree, the silence and solitude of the rental house helped me recover. I got better. Still no diagnosis, though. That was March of 2001. I needed money to live on, no more booking rentals on the Oregon coast. So I substitute taught for Morongo Unified, and my claim to fame is that I completely flunked teaching kindergarten. In between the substitute teaching, I was a substitute secretary and receptionist and made the long drive down below on most days. Those jobs ended when I was hired to be a special education teacher. I talk about those adventures in my book, Facing the Ultimate Fear. While teaching, I had a couple more small brain hemorrhages, but got better after each one. I taught for 2 school years. On July 1, 2003, I had the huge hemorrhage that put me in the operating room. I got a diagnosis finally. It was a cavernous angioma, a non-cancerous tumor in the brain stem. The condition had taken the lives of women on my mother's side of the family, including my mother. I think I'm the only one left. I went for the surgery because I wanted to live. I'm the only one who got to have the surgery, and here I am. I had an enormous medical miracle. Scientists don't call it a miracle, they call it a remarkable recovery. What I risked was not being able to walk, talk, and think ever again. And the only thing I don't do now is drive a car, but I'm confident that someday I will. It's only been 16 years. This whole story is in my book. But there's even more to it than that. My miracle was actually premeditated. That's another whole topic. I went for the miracle because I just couldn't stomach being permanently disabled. I trained for the surgery like an Olympic athlete trains for a gold medal. But my gold medal would be to regain the ability to walk, talk, and think. In the book, I describe how I did that. Writing a book is probably the best thing I could have done to regain those skills. Why? By helping me remember what I had used to get through the surgery. I could then also use these same attitudes to get through the recovery. Both were life-death episodes.
Can you talk to me about the training when you say you trained like an Olympic athlete? What were some of those things that you did?
They're all outlined in the book. Let me see if I can think of one of them. One of the things that I did was I made a list of, I call it my list of 12 desires, and it was a list of 12 things that I wanted to be able to do after I came home from the hospital and recovered completely. And that was kind of a sneaky way of making a goal and having something to look forward to in the future. So I did a lot of that kind of thing, set up things that I could look forward to in the future.
Kind of like sending that message out to the universe to say, these are the things I'm expecting to happen when I come out, and I'm going to expect to do these things. And it's going to, the surgery is going to have a great outcome, and I'm going to accomplish these 12 goals when I get out of that surgery. So was that something that you thought of on your own to do, or was it through conversations with other people that it kind of came to you?
Well, that was a long time ago. I really don't remember how it happened. But I can tell you that when I found out that I was going to have not just brain surgery, but brain stem surgery, and how slim the chances were, I thought of it as an opportunity. I didn't think of it as, poor me, oh, look at this horrible thing that has happened to me. I thought of it as an opportunity, and so right away I hired a coach and a mentor. I never met the coach in person. She lived out of state. She was an accountant by day and learning, Dawn, some of these things that you just mentioned. She was learning those by night. So here we were, two people learning by doing in a life-death situation.
Oh my goodness.
I just didn't want to miss out on anything that this experience had to teach me.
Right. I want to go back to something you said about your mother dying. Did anyone in your family know at that time when she passed away that this was the reason?
That's a tough question to answer, because these reasons would not necessarily be the primary cause of death. They would be the secondary cause of death. So that would be really difficult to ascertain.
All right. So you have these brain aneurysms, and then finally you get to a point where you need to have surgery.
Yes.
What year was that you had the surgery?
I had it in 2003.
And then from the time that you had the surgery until you, would you say, I don't know how to phrase it, all your faculties returned, if you will? How long was that process?
Ooh, that's hard to say, too, because you never stop healing. Never, ever, ever, ever. And so I still have the challenge of driving a car. And so am I completely healed now? The medical community certainly says so. In medicine, you don't have to be 100% to have had a miracle. I remember one of my roommates at the hospital was an individual who'd been in a really bad motorcycle accident and lost one leg below the knee and was fitted with a prosthetic leg, and his wife was told that it was a 100% cure.
Oh.
So that considering from the medical angle, considering what could have happened to me, the inability to talk, the inability to walk, the inability to think, in other words, being a drooling imbecile in a wheelchair, compared to that, this is considered miraculous.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
When you came out of the surgery, did you still have, when you say you had to learn to walk, talk, and think, so there was some physical therapy obviously involved?
Oh, there was a whole lot. And my brain surgeon came to me one day. I think it was probably about 3 weeks after the surgery. And he said, "You are a candidate for rehab." And I was sent to 2 rehab hospitals. I was in one of them for about 3 weeks, maybe longer than that. And then I went to a second rehab hospital, which was a skilled nursing facility in Riverside. And I was there for several weeks. And then after that, I went to assisted living for 3 days. That's all I could hack it, was 3 days.
Oh gosh, what happened?
And then I came home.
Okay. You made the big leap.
I made the big leap, yes.
So all this time that you're in the rehab, now you've got this book. You were in the surgery at 2003. When did the book come out?
2018.
Okay.
Took me a long time.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. While you were recovering, were you recording things either verbally, or were you writing journals and diaries to kind of keep track of your progress?
Yes, I was writing journals and diaries. It was the most amazing thing. And I'm sure that this had a great deal to do with my recovery, because every day I would wake up and the only thing I could do was dress myself and go walk from the bedroom to the kitchen, make a little breakfast, then walk into the living room where I sat all day long.
Oh gosh.
And that was how I learned to have quiet time. And during that quiet time all day long, ideas kept coming to me and coming to me and coming to me, and I would write them down. But for the first couple of years, I had to write with a marker, one of those Sharpies, and the letters had to be 1 inch high. Wow. Otherwise, I couldn't see them.
Yeah.
But after a while, I started recording the words. For a long time, I couldn't do words. I was just sitting in the silence, and ideas were coming and coming and coming, and I don't know where they came from. And then I began to be able to write and mark them down, and those sentences, which grew to paragraphs, became my first public speech, which I gave 8 months after coming home from the hospital. I started on the public speaking circuit as soon as I had learned how to climb the steps to a stage, and had learned how to grip the podium for balance.
So in all that silence, do you think that you could have written this book and had these moments in other than the desert?
That's a really good question. I'm pretty convinced, Dawn, that it was the silence and the solitude of the desert that really helped me recover, and that I was somehow positioned in this desert for that to happen.
That's going to make me cry, because I think that's a lot of the reason many of us end up here is because there's something that we're supposed to be doing, and we've been not necessarily ignoring it, but distracted by so many other things, and then the desert kind of says, well, come here and think about it here. And that's when it all starts to come together. So thanks for sharing that with me. That's amazing. So now the book's been out since 2018. How has that been going for you?
I'm just now beginning to promote and market the book. It's taken me a whole year. I had some things to work through. I had some things that happened. My house flooded. It was a flooding toilet.
Oh no, not nature.
No, not Mother Nature.
A different kind of nature.
Yes. And so I had to work through all of those things before I could actually do the things that I'm doing now to market and promote the book.
And what are some of the things that you're doing?
Oh, well, mass mail out to groups that study this sort of thing. I talk to whatever groups would like me to talk to them. I'm doing this podcast with you, for which I am very grateful.
I'm glad to have you.
There are other things too, but they're not coming to my mind
that's okay.
right now.
Well, I will put where to find the book in the show notes, but where can people find it if they're interested in?
Amazon sells both the softcover and the ebook.
Okay.
Barnes & Noble sells the softcover. Barnes & Noble Nook sells the ebook. There is no audiobook yet.
Okay.
There are 3 shops in the Morongo Basin. Each has, maybe 1, 3, 5 books, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And that in Joshua Tree, that's Space Cowboy.
They're wonderful.
And in Yucca Valley, I have one on the north side of the highway, which is Cactus Wren Book Exchange.
Oh, I don't know that.
They have 3 copies. They're anxious to sell them because they really are a used book store, but they have a few copies. And they have a poster in the window so people know that they've come to the right place to buy the book. The poster is a photograph of the front cover, which is a light blue. And then on the south side of the highway is Rainbow Stew.
Oh, and they're wonderful too.
And and I've known the proprietor for the whole 20 years I've been up here on the desert. So
that's great.
That's it for right now.
Can you think back to days before you knew you were going into the surgery and what kind of thoughts were going through your mind?
Oh, yes. Number 1 thought was fear. Fear. Scared shitless, pardon the phrase, but,
We like truth here.
never was this scared before in my entire life. I mean, just the whole concept of brain surgery, isn't that the most dangerous surgery there is, you know? And then my brain surgeon told me that the brain stem is the high rent district of the brain, meaning that every single thought, emotion, every breath you take, every beat your heart beats, all of that all that communication has to go from the lower part of the body through the brain stem to the upper part of the brain. And then the upper part of the brain does its thing and sends the messages back down to the organs and the cells in the body so that they can do their job properly. And so if there's any mistake in the surgery or anything at all, those messages get skewed, and that's where the deficits or the disabilities come in.
Right. And from a quote-unquote healed and back to 100% capacity, where would you say you are there physically, and where would you say you are there emotionally?
Probably physically, because the only thing left to do is learn to drive a car again and get my license reinstated. Probably 96%, maybe even higher than that, maybe even 99% there.
Right.
Emotionally, really high. I wouldn't even want to guess about that. I've plowed through a lot of stuff using mind over matter methods, PTSD, depression, anxiety, you name it. And along the way, I discovered lots of things that I never, ever knew before. And
about yourself or about other things?
About the fact that for me, I can only speak for myself. For me, after I came home from the hospital, and I was 2 months in the hospital, and was completed with the physical part, the medicine part, and all of that, then the rest of it was emotional. And people ask me, well, how come it's taken you so long? Couldn't you just pop a pill?
Oh, no. No.
And I finally figured out that the reason it has taken me so long to get to this point is because I had so much to learn. Remember, I was the one who wanted to use this experience to suck every piece of knowledge out of it that I possibly could. So
yeah. So you have a little note in front of you.
Yes.
Talk to me about this note.
A secret. I would like to share a secret.
Okay.
And this is one of the many things that I learned from the experience.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, yes. There were 5 personality traits I had developed as a little kid. These traits made me look like a bad person. But it was precisely these 5 personality traits that were responsible for my medical miracle. Why? They made it possible for me to learn the one thing that turned my medical adventure into a miracle recovery. And that one thing was to let go of fear. I picked 3 of the 5 traits that I'd like to tell you about.
Please.
If you want to stop me after the first one in the interest of time, that's fine. Just tell me. As I describe these 3, I'd like the listeners, whoever you are, wonderful people, to apply them to yourself. That way you'll get the most out of what I'm going to say. Number 1 is stubbornness. I'll bet you thought stubbornness was a bad thing. I've been told that my whole life, but let me set the record straight. Stubbornness made me want to find new solutions to problems, and I would never quit till I found that solution. My stubbornness turned into never giving up, kind of like, I'll show you. You don't think I can do this, so I'll do it to prove you wrong. I'll have a miracle. You want me to go on? Number 2 is conceited. I thought I was better than other people. You know, big ego. That was supposedly a bad thing. But guess what? It gave me the confidence to tackle the biggest challenge of my life. I was actually convinced that I would have a big, fat miracle. Now, I don't need that big ego anymore, but I did then. I've since learned another way. And number 3, do you want to hear number 3? Okay. And the third thing is being strong-willed. Had to have it my way, kind of like Frank Sinatra, you know. Anybody else out there like that? No? Really? Let's try again. Anybody else that way?
My way.
It's a good thing to be strong-willed, and here's why. Strong-willed means you don't back down. You don't take no for an answer, and you don't mind being criticized for it. You discover that it helps you get through tough spots in life. Strong-willed overpowered my fears. Having to have things my way overpowered my fears. My focus turned from fears to having it my way, and when my fears were gone, I got my miracle. I lived to tell you about it. If you're like this, if you have 1, 2, or 3 of these traits, you just reach right around and pat yourself on the back. Just don't break your arm doing it.
That's fantastic. We are out of time.
Okay, that's it.
But I just want to tell you how grateful I am to have you here today and to hear your story. And I can't wait to read the book and see all the recommendations you have for everybody to just get over themselves and their fear and have their miracle, because that's why we're here.
I discovered, too bad we don't have more time to talk, but you may have this book.
Thank you.
Because another one of the huge things that came out of this is that I learned what it takes to put the fears aside, what it takes to allow that miracle to come to you. And it doesn't even have to be a medical miracle. I mean, mine just happened to be. But all this stuff is about how the brain works. So it's no accident that I had a brain incident as opposed to any other incident in my body. Yeah.
That's great. And the book is called Facing the Ultimate Fear, A New Future. Kathleen Lowndes, thank you so much for being here. But before I let you go, I would like you to choose 4 numbers between 1 and 50.
Okay. Between
1 and 50.
Okay. 1.
Okay.
50.
Okay.
49.
Okay.
And 26.
All right. And the answers to Kathleen's questions will be available to Patreon supporters of the podcast, for which I am so grateful. If you would like to hear Kathleen's answers to these questions, go out to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and sign up to be a patron. The first question Kathleen will answer is, you find a lottery ticket that ends up winning $10 million. What would you do? How do you define generosity? Finish this sentence, I've always wanted. And what was the first paying job you ever had, and where was it? So again, if you want to hear Kathleen's answers to those questions, join us over at Patreon. Go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and sign up to become a patron. Thank you so much for being here today.
So I've got a couple of shout-outs this week. First to Kimberly S. Thank you so much for your stellar review of the podcast. Kimberly writes, Dawn does an incredible job meticulously stitching together the stories of so many women who call the Mojave Desert home. Whether born here or relocated, this desert has an important place for women, then and now, and it's all being recorded here. From the history of women being able to prove up on a homestead in the 50s when those pesky mortgages were almost non-existent for unmarried women, to the women today who are proving up their homesteads in a wide variety of life pursuits. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Kimberly. I really appreciate that. And if you didn't know, Kimberly is the creator of the Desert Lady Diaries logo, so give her a shout out for that. And shout-outs to Dawn R. and Carol C. for signing up for the weekly newsletter. Thank you for doing that. And Hillary at the Panamint Springs General Store near Death Valley National Park. It was great meeting you, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Here's Jean-Paul to tell you about his podcast, Simultaneous Times.
Science fiction stories and interviews blasting straight out of the Mojave Desert and beyond. Space Cowboy Books presents Simultaneous Times Podcast. Free to stream on your favorite podcast player. Find out more at spacecowboybooks.com and be sure to visit our store in Joshua Tree, California.
See you back here next week. Thanks so much for listening.